It struck me as perfectly apt as I watched Sarah's immaculately manicured fingers push the divorce documents across my kitchen island. My sister-in-law, soon-to-be former sister-in-law, couldn't quite mask the combination of sympathy and satisfaction in her gaze. Felix is incredibly occupied with his business ventures, she clarified, as though her brother's absence at this crucial juncture required justification. 9 years of matrimony delivered to my doorstep in a manila envelope. Those 9 years condensed into legal jargon and dotted lines awaiting signatures. The morning light pouring through my kitchen window felt unusually stark, accentuating every speck of dust on the granite countertop Felix and I had chosen together when we first bought this house. He would have come himself, but you understand how it is with the new development project, Sarah added, her voice laced with that familiar tone of someone attempting to soften a blow that had already landed. I felt like laughing at the absurdity of it all. Felix, the man who once drove 4 hours simply to bring me soup when I was sick, couldn't spare 30 minutes to hand-deliver divorce papers to his wife of 9 years. The kitchen suddenly felt cramped, overflowing with memories. Every corner held a snapshot of our shared existence. The coffee maker he surprised me with on our 5th anniversary, the worn patch on the hardwood floor where we'd slow danced on countless Sunday mornings, the quirky magnets we'd accumulated from our travels adorning the refrigerator. Of course, I responded, my voice more composed than I anticipated. Business first. It's always been business first, hasn't it? I reached for my purse hanging by the door, my movements deliberate and calm. Sarah watched me, confusion creeping across her features, as I pulled out another envelope. This one was cream-colored and weighted with heavy cardstock inside. Would you mind giving this to him? I asked, extending the envelope toward her. It's something I've been meaning to share. The paper felt warm in my hands, as if it held its own energy, its own purpose. Sarah accepted it, her curiosity evident in the slight tilt of her head. What is it? Just some information I think he should have, I replied, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Something that might interest him more than these divorce papers. As Sarah departed, her heels clicking against the walkway, I watched through the window as she paused by her car. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the envelope I'd given her, and I knew the precise moment she saw what was inside. Her sharp intake of breath was visible even from where I stood. The documents inside weren't just papers, they were revelations. Revelations about the real reason I'd been working late at the gallery for the past 3 months, about why I'd been so understanding of Felix's constant business trips and late-night meetings, about the secret I'd uncovered that would shake the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. Standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was a solid marriage, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. The weight I'd been carrying for months had finally shifted. Felix had chosen to end our marriage with cold efficiency, through his sister and a manila envelope, but I had chosen to fight back with truth delivered in cream-colored cardstock. The divorce papers lay untouched on the counter, but my heart was racing with anticipation. In the next few hours, everything would change, not because of Felix's decision to end our marriage, but because of mine to reveal what I'd discovered. Sometimes, the most powerful moves in life come not from the blows we receive, but from how we choose to respond to them. I picked up my phone as it buzzed with an incoming call. Felix's name flashed across the screen, right on schedule. The game was about to begin. My phone persisted in buzzing insistently, Felix's name flashing like a warning signal. I let it ring. After years of jumping at his every call, this small act of defiance felt strangely liberating. Instead, I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and stood before the full-length mirror he'd insisted on installing last year. "You need to see how beautiful you are," he'd said then, his voice full of that quiet conviction that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Now, I wondered if that mirror, like so many other things, had been just another way to shape me into his ideal image. I studied my reflection. Shoulder-length brown hair, green eyes that had somehow maintained their spark despite everything, and the slight worry lines around my mouth that had deepened over the past year. At 34, I wasn't the same wide-eyed 25-year-old who'd fallen head over heels for the charming gallery owner who'd visited my small photography exhibition. The memory of our first meeting flooded back. I was showcasing my work, photographs of abandoned buildings that I'd transformed into haunting portraits of urban decay. Felix had stood for nearly an hour in front of a particular piece, an old factory window reflecting a sunset, the broken glass creating a kaleidoscope of golden light. "This isn't just a photograph," he'd said, turning to me with those intense dark eyes. "It's a story about finding beauty in brokenness." His understanding of my work had swept me off my feet. Within 6 months, we were married, and he'd offered me a position as curator at his prestigious gallery. The phone finally stopped ringing, only to ping with a text message. "What are you playing at, Ashley? Call me immediately." I smiled at my reflection, remembering how I'd discovered the truth. It hadn't been through dramatic revelations or private investigators. Instead, it had been through small details that didn't quite add up, like pieces of a puzzle that showed a different picture than the one on the box. It started with the gallery's new assistant, Claire, young, talented, and eager to learn. She'd come to me 3 months ago with what she thought was a simple accounting discrepancy. "I'm probably just reading it wrong," she'd said, showing me the gallery's financial records she'd been organizing. "But these numbers for the Anderson collection sale don't match what's in the official documentation." I dismissed it initially. Felix handled all the financial aspects of the gallery. "That's not my department," I'd always said, trusting him implicitly with the business side while I focused on the artistic direction. But Claire's discovery had planted a seed of curiosity that grew into something I couldn't ignore. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sarah. "Ashley, what the hell is this?" "Felix is absolutely livid. What have you done?" I turned away from the mirror and walked to the window, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across our carefully maintained garden. The rose bushes I'd planted in our second year of marriage were in full bloom, their pink petals a stark contrast to the mounting tension in the air. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about the subtle ways Felix had been manipulating not just the gallery's finances, but my entire life. The separate bank account I'd discovered hidden behind layers of clever accounting, the mysterious art collector who always seemed to buy pieces at suspiciously high prices, the way Felix had gradually convinced me to step back from my own photography, claiming my role as curator was more important. My phone lit up with another message, this time from David, my oldest friend and the gallery's head of security. "Just got fired. I guess you dropped the bomb. Are you safe?" David had been instrumental in helping me piece everything together, though he hadn't known it at the time. His casual mention of security cameras being disabled during certain private showings had been another piece of the puzzle. Felix hadn't just been selling art. He'd been using my curatorial reputation to authenticate pieces with questionable provenance, making a fortune in the process. I picked up my phone and finally typed a response to David. "I'm fine. Everything's going according to plan. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." The sun was setting now, casting that same golden light I'd captured in my photograph all those years ago, but this time I wasn't documenting beauty in brokenness. I was creating it. The envelope I'd given Sarah contained proof of everything: the fraudulent sales, the manipulated authentications, the paper trail that led right to Felix's carefully hidden accounts. But there was something else in that envelope, something that would hit Felix harder than any financial revelation, something that proved he hadn't been as clever as he thought, that his wife hadn't been as blind as he'd assumed. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the house. Through the window, I could see Felix's car in the driveway, his tall figure standing at the door. The moment of confrontation had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I took one last look in the mirror, straightened my shoulders, and headed downstairs. It was time to face the man who thought he could discard 9 years of marriage with a manila envelope and a busy schedule. The game wasn't just beginning, it was about to change entirely. The walk to the front door felt like crossing an ocean. Each step carried the weight of 9 years of countless memories, of love turned to betrayal. I opened the door to find Felix exactly as I'd expected, impeccably dressed in his signature charcoal suit, his dark hair showing distinguished touches of gray at the temples, but his usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing something I'd rarely seen: genuine fear. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. The scent of his expensive cologne filled the space, the same scent that used to make my heart skip a beat, now just another reminder of his carefully crafted facade. "Please come in," I said dryly, closing the door. "Though I thought you were too busy for personal visits. Isn't that why Sarah delivered the divorce papers?" He spun around, his face flushed with anger. "Don't play games with me, Ashley. Where did you get those documents? Who have you shown them to?" I moved past him into the living room, taking my time to sit in my favorite armchair, the one I'd reupholstered myself last summer while he was away on one of his many business trips. "Interesting that you're more concerned about who's seen them than denying what they show." "This isn't a game," he snapped, remaining standing, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? The gallery's reputation—" "The gallery's reputation?" I interrupted, letting out a short laugh. "You mean my reputation? The one you've been using to authenticate questionable pieces. The one that's been making you a fortune on the side." His expression shifted, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the calculating businessman he'd become. "Everything I did was for us, for our future. The gallery needed those deals to survive." "Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't you dare try to justify this as something you did for us. The separate account in the Caymans isn't exactly a joint investment in our future." He paced the room, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." I watched him move, remembering how I used to find his restless energy charming. "But that's not what's really eating at you, is it? You want to know what else was in that envelope besides the financial records?" Felix stopped pacing, his hands clenched at his sides. "Ashley, sit down." "Felix," I said softly, "you're going to want to be sitting for this part." He hesitated, then sank into the couch across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the room. Through the window, I could see our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, walking her dog, completely unaware of the drama unfolding behind our perfectly maintained facade. "Do you remember last spring?" I began, keeping my voice steady. "When you insisted I take that trip to the wellness retreat? Said I seemed stressed, needed time to myself." His face remained impassive, but I saw his jaw tighten. "I didn't go," I continued. "I stayed in the city, followed you one night when you said you had a private showing at the gallery, watched you meet with Victor Taylor." "Ashley," he started, but I cut him off. "Victor Taylor, the mysterious collector who always seems to pay well above market value for certain pieces. The same Victor Taylor whose name appears on multiple transfer documents to your Cayman account." I leaned forward. "But here's what's interesting. When I started digging into Victor Taylor, I found something fascinating. He doesn't exist." Felix's face had gone pale. "You don't understand the complexity of international art sales." "Oh, but I do now," I interrupted. "I understand plenty, including why you've been so insistent that I step back from my photography career. Could destroy everything we've built." "No, Felix. I'm revealing what you've destroyed. But here's what you really want to know. What made Sarah's hand shake when she opened that envelope?" I stood as well, meeting his gaze. "Remember Anna?" The color drained from his face completely. "What about her?" "Your assistant before Claire, the one who suddenly quit and moved away." I moved closer to him. "She didn't just quit, did she? She threatened to expose everything, so you paid her off, quite generously, according to the records I found. But what you didn't know was that before she left, she made copies of everything." Felix sank back onto the couch, his carefully maintained composure crumbling. "You're bluffing. Anna and I had a lovely lunch last week," I said, walking to the window. "She's doing well, by the way, opened her own small gallery in Seattle." She was quite relieved to finally tell someone the whole story about the forgeries, the fake Providence documents, the shell companies she'd been carrying that guilt for years. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Outside, life continued normally, cars passing, birds singing, the everyday symphony of our quiet suburban street. Inside, years of lies were crumbling like a house of cards. "What do you want?" Felix finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face him, the last rays of sunlight casting my shadow long across the floor. "I want what I've always wanted, the truth. But since you've never been able to give me that, I'll settle for something else." Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's here. The financial records, Anna's documents, surveillance footage from the gallery, photos of your meetings with your non-existent art collector. I have multiple copies, of course, stored safely with people you don't know." "You're blackmailing me." He sounded almost impressed. "No, Felix, I'm negotiating. You wanted a divorce? Fine, but it's going to be on my terms." The doorbell rang again, making us both jump. Through the window, I could see David's car pulling up behind Felix's in the driveway. "That would be my lawyer," I said. "Shall we discuss those terms?" David's presence filled the room with a different kind of tension. Where Felix was all polished surfaces and sharp edges, David brought a steady, grounding energy. He'd been my friend since college, long before I met Felix, and seeing him now, standing there in his slightly rumpled suit, briefcase in hand, made me realize how much I'd missed having genuine people in my life. "Ashley," he nodded, then turned to Felix with professional detachment. "Mr. Wilson." Felix had recovered some of his composure, though his eyes kept darting to the USB drive I'd placed on the coffee table between us. "I wasn't aware you were a lawyer, David. Weren't you my head of security until about an hour ago?" "I think we both know why I was fired," David replied, taking a seat next to me. "But you're right, I'm not a lawyer. I'm here as a witness. Your actual lawyer should be arriving shortly, assuming you called her after reading what was in that envelope." Right on cue, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Catherine Ferran, Felix's longtime legal counsel. I'd always liked Catherine, despite her association with Felix. She was straightforward, practical, and most importantly, had too much integrity to be involved in Felix's schemes. Her presence confirmed what I'd suspected. Felix was taking this seriously. "Well," Catherine said, surveying the room as she set her briefcase on the dining table, "this is quite a gathering for a Thursday afternoon." She turned to Felix. "I've reviewed the documents you forwarded. We should discuss this privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of everyone here," I interjected. "After all, transparency is what we're aiming for, isn't it?" Catherine's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Very well. Mr. Wilson, based on what I've seen, Mrs. Wilson's evidence is substantial. If even half of these documents are verified, we're looking at serious legal consequences." "These are private business matters," Felix began, but Catherine cut him off. "Private business matters that involve fraud, tax evasion, and potential art forgery. The gallery's reputation isn't just at stake here. We're talking about criminal charges." The room fell silent. Through the window, I could see the last hints of daylight fading, street lamps flickering to life one by one. It felt symbolic somehow, illuminating what had been hidden in darkness. "What are your terms?" Catherine asked, turning to me. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd prepared for, rehearsed countless times in my mind. "First, I want the gallery, not just my current position, full ownership." Felix started to protest, but Catherine silenced him with a look. "Second, I want a fair division of assets, including the contents of the Cayman account." I paused, watching Felix's face. "And third, I want my freedom, No contests, no delays, no attempts to discredit me or damage my reputation in the art world. You're asking for everything, Felix said, his voice tight with anger. The gallery is my life's work. No, I corrected him quietly. The gallery is our life's work. The difference is, I built it with integrity, while you used it to line your pockets through fraud. Catherine was already making notes. The gallery transfer could be arranged as part of the divorce settlement. The offshore accounts, she glanced at Felix, would need to be properly declared, of course. Of course, I agreed. I'm not interested in continuing any illegal operations. Everything will be above board going forward. And what guarantee do I have? Felix asked, leaning forward. That once everything is signed, you won't turn over that evidence anyway? I met his gaze steadily. The same guarantee I had that you'd be faithful, honest, and true. The difference is, I'll keep my word. The weight of 9 years of marriage hung heavy in the air between us. I could see Felix calculating, weighing options, looking for angles, just as he always had. But for once, he had no leverage, no way to manipulate the situation to his advantage. There's something else, I added, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. Remember this? You gave it to me on our first anniversary, said I should use it to write down my dreams, my goals. I opened it, revealing pages filled with my handwriting. I did, and do you know what I discovered when I read through it recently? Every dream I'd written down, every goal I'd set, they all started to change after we married. Gradually, subtly, they became smaller, safer, more aligned with what you wanted. Felix's expression flickered with something, recognition, regret. It was gone too quickly to tell. My biggest dream, I continued, was to create art that moved people, that made them see the world differently. Instead, I became a curator, authenticating other people's work, and even that you corrupted. David shifted beside me, his presence a silent reminder of support. Catherine was still taking notes, but her pen had slowed, and I could tell she was listening intently. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice gaining strength. You're going to sign the divorce papers. You're going to transfer the gallery to me. You're going to declare all your hidden assets, and then you're going to disappear from my life. No contact, no interference, no attempts at reconciliation. And if I refuse? Felix asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then everything goes to the authorities. The FBI's art crime team would be particularly interested in the documentation about the forged certificates of authenticity, not to mention the IRS's response to those undeclared accounts. Catherine cleared her throat. Mr. Wilson, as your legal counsel, I strongly advise considering Mrs. Wilson's terms. They are remarkably reasonable, given the circumstances. The grandfather clock in the hallway, another piece of our shared life, chimed 8 times. Each sound seemed to mark another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Felix stood up slowly, straightening his suit jacket with hands that trembled slightly. I'll need time to review the specific terms with my lawyer. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied. The gallery opens at 10. I'd like this resolved before then. As Catherine gathered her things and prepared to leave with Felix, she paused beside me. For what it's worth, she said softly, I'm sorry, I had no idea. I know, I replied. Neither did I, for a long time. The front door closed behind them, leaving me alone with David in the growing darkness of the living room. The USB drive still sat on the coffee table, its small LED light blinking steadily like a beacon. You okay? David asked, breaking the silence. I looked around the room, at the photos on the walls, the carefully chosen furniture, the life I'd built with a man I thought I knew. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. After David left, the house felt impossibly large and empty. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. The vintage camera collection I'd stopped adding 2 years ago, the art books Felix had always chosen, the wedding photos still hanging in the hallway. In it, we're both laughing, my white dress catching the sunset light, Felix looking at me like I was his whole world. What a convincing performance that had been. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Security just let me back into the gallery. Everything okay? Sweet, observant Claire, who'd inadvertently started this whole revelation with her careful attention to detail. I typed back a quick response. All good. See you tomorrow morning. Big changes coming. In the kitchen, I found Sarah's handbag. She must have left it during the chaos earlier. Inside was the cream-colored envelope I'd given her, now wrinkled from being handled repeatedly. I pulled out the contents, spreading them across the kitchen island where, just hours ago, she delivered the divorce papers. The evidence was devastating in its thoroughness. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, emails between Felix and various collectors who didn't exist, photographs from gallery events where certain pieces appeared, only to be replaced by nearly identical ones weeks later. Anna's detailed records of every transaction she'd been forced to process, every document she'd been asked to falsify. But what made Sarah's hands shake wasn't just the evidence of Felix's art fraud. It was the other documentation, the proof that her own husband, Thomas, had been helping Felix launder money through his real estate business. The brothers-in-law had quite an operation going, and Sarah had been as much in the dark as I had been. I pulled out my phone again and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the first ring. You left your bag, I said softly. There was a long pause. Did you know? She finally asked, her voice rough. About Thomas? I found out while investigating Felix. Sarah, I'm so sorry. She let out a shaky breath. All those late-night meetings, the sudden influx of cash for the new house renovations. God, I feel so stupid. You're not stupid. We trust the people we love. That's not a character flaw. What are you going to do with all of it? I looked out the window at the garden I'd planted, watching the motion sensor lights flicker on as a cat stalked through the flower beds. That depends on Felix and Thomas. He's been on the phone with his lawyer for hours, Sarah said. Thomas, I mean. He came home, went straight to his study and locked the door. Come over, I found myself saying. Bring an overnight bag. You shouldn't be alone right now. Another pause. Why are you being kind to me after everything? Because none of this is your fault, and because right now, you're probably feeling exactly what I felt 3 months ago when I first discovered Felix's deception. No one should have to go through that alone. An hour later, Sarah was sitting at my kitchen island, her mascara smudged, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable without her usual perfect posture and polished demeanor. I kept pushing you to work less, she said, staring into her wine. Kept saying you should focus more on being a good wife, support Felix's career. God, the things I said to you. You were repeating what they wanted us to believe, I replied, pouring myself a glass. That our role was to support, to maintain, to look the other way. Well, I'm done with that narrative. My phone lit up with an email from Catherine. The subject line read, Preliminary agreement, urgent review required. He's agreeing to your terms, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed, scanning the document. Because he knows the alternative is worse. The gallery, the accounts, the clean break. It's a small price to pay to avoid federal charges. What about Thomas? I set my phone down. That's up to you, Sarah. The evidence about Thomas's involvement is yours to do with as you see fit. I included it because you deserve to know the truth, but what you do with that truth is your decision. She nodded slowly, then straightened her shoulders. I want to see everything, every document, every transaction. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. We spent the next few hours going through it all. I watched Sarah transform from a devastated wife to a woman filled with quiet determination. She took meticulous notes, asked sharp questions, and gradually built a picture of the deception that had shaped our lives without our knowledge. Around midnight, As we sat in my living room surrounded by papers and empty wine glasses, Sarah looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. How did you do it? Stay so calm, plan everything so carefully. I had something they never expected me to have, I replied. Time. When you underestimate someone enough to think they'll never catch on, you get careless. Felix was so convinced I was focused on being the perfect wife and curator that he never noticed me piecing it all together. What now? Sarah asked. After tomorrow, after they sign everything. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading into the night. Now we rebuild, but this time we build something real. My phone buzzed again, Felix calling for the third time since he'd left. I let it go to voicemail. You should really change your ringtone, Sarah said with a hint of her old humor. Something triumphant. I will survive, maybe. I laughed, and it felt good, real. I was thinking more, these boots are made for walking. We both chuckled, the sound echoing in the quiet house. It wasn't happy laughter exactly, but it was healing. The kind that comes when you're standing in the ruins of one life and beginning to see the foundation of another. I kept every negative review I ever got for my photography, I said, walking to my home office. I pulled out a folder from the bottom drawer of my desk. Every criticism, every rejection. Felix said he was protecting me by encouraging me to focus on curation instead. Sarah took the papers, frowning as she read. Look at these dates. They're all from the same 2-month period, right after we got married. These are fake, aren't they? Part of his plan to make you doubt yourself? I nodded. The final piece of evidence I needed. I tracked down every supposed reviewer. None of them had ever seen my work. The rejection letters came from publications that didn't even exist. Ashley, Sarah's voice cracked. I'm so sorry for everything. Don't be sorry, I said, taking the folder back. Be angry and then be strong. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from Catherine. Documents will be ready for signing at 9:00 a.m. Felix has agreed to all terms. I showed the message to Sarah, who raised her wine glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I agreed, and to finally seeing clearly. I woke before dawn, my body humming with nervous energy. Sarah was still asleep on the guest room bed, her face peaceful for the first time since yesterday's revelations. I quietly closed her door and headed to my studio, the small room above the garage that I'd gradually stopped using over the years. Dust covered everything, my old cameras, half-finished projects, sketches for photo series I'd never completed. In the corner, still wrapped in protective cloth, stood my favorite piece, the one that had caught Felix's attention at that first exhibition. I pulled the cloth away, revealing the factory window photograph. The morning light caught the glass in the frame, creating the same kaleidoscope effect I'd captured in the image. You haven't been up here in a while? I turned to find Sarah in the doorway, wrapped in one of my robes, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked different in the morning light, stronger, despite the shadows under her eyes. Felix said it was impractical to keep it as a studio, I replied, taking one of the coffees. Said I should focus on the gallery's needs instead of hobby projects. Sarah ran her finger through the dust on one of the frames. You know what's crazy? I actually believed him when he said you'd lost interest in photography. He was so convincing when he talked about how you'd found your true calling as a curator. He was always good at spinning stories, I said, sipping my coffee, making people believe what he wanted them to believe. My phone buzzed a text from Catherine. Meeting moved to the gallery, 8:30 a.m. Felix insists. He's trying to maintain some control, Sarah observed, reading over my shoulder. Making it happen on his turf. I smiled. Except it's not his turf anymore. He just doesn't know it yet. We got ready in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I chose my outfit carefully, Not one of the expensive designer suits Felix preferred, but a simple black dress I'd bought myself, paired with my mother's vintage pearl earrings. Small acts of reclamation. The gallery was quiet when we arrived at 8:15, though lights were already on in the main exhibition space. Through the glass front doors, I could see Claire at her desk, her posture tense. When she saw me, her face lit up with relief. "Mrs. Wilson," she started, then caught herself. "Ashley, Mr. Wilson is in the office with Miss Foran and another gentleman I don't recognize." "That would be Robert Pfizer, his personal attorney," I said, setting my bag on Claire's desk. "Could you bring us some coffee? The good kind, not the stuff Felix usually orders." Claire grinned, understanding the small rebellion right away. Sarah touched my arm. "I should go. Thomas will be wondering where I am." "You sure you're welcome to stay?" She shook her head. "This is your moment besides." She patted her bag where I knew she kept copies of the documents about Thomas. "I have my own conversations to prepare for." After she left, I took a moment to walk through the gallery. The current exhibition, Reflections in Modern Art, had been my project, though Felix had insisted on certain pieces being included. Now I knew why. They were part of his fraud scheme, their provenance carefully fabricated to inflate their value. "The coffee's ready," Claire called softly. "And Ashley, whatever happens in there, I want you to know the staff is behind you. We all are." I turned to her, touched by the loyalty of this young woman who'd risked her job to bring a discrepancy to my attention. "Thank you, Claire. Things are going to be very different around here from now on." The office door opened and Catherine emerged. "We ready for you?" Felix sat behind his desk, soon to be my desk, looking immaculate as always in a navy suit. Robert Pfizer stood by the window, radiating expensive litigation experience. A document folder lay on the desk between them. "Ashley," Felix said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're looking well." "Amazing what a good night's sleep can do," I replied, taking a seat. "Shall we begin?" Catherine opened the folder. "Everything's as agreed. The gallery ownership transfer, the divorce settlement including the disclosed offshore accounts, and the non-disclosure agreement protecting all parties." "One small addition," Robert interjected. "Mr. Wilson would like to maintain an advisory role in the gallery's operations." "No." The word came out sharp and clear. "Ashley," Felix leaned forward, "be reasonable. My connections in the art world—" "Your connections?" I interrupted. "You mean the fake collectors, the forged authentications? Those connections?" The room fell silent. Even Robert looked uncomfortable. "Sign the papers as agreed," I continued, "or I make a call that starts a federal investigation. Your choice." Felix's jaw tightened, but he picked up the pen. I watched as he signed each document, his signature becoming progressively less controlled. When he finished, he stood abruptly. "I built this gallery from nothing," he said, his voice rough with emotion, or perhaps just wounded pride. "No," I corrected him gently. "We built it together. I just didn't realize at the time that we were building it on lies." Catherine slid the signed documents to me. As I began to sign, Claire knocked and entered with the coffee. "Perfect timing," I said. "Claire, could you gather the staff in the main gallery? I'd like to have a brief meeting before we open." "Actually," Felix started, but I cut him off. "You should leave now, Felix. Your keycard has already been deactivated." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, perhaps recognition of the woman I'd become, so different from the one he'd tried to shape me into. Without another word, he left, Robert trailing behind him. Catherine gathered the documents, her usual professional mask slipping to reveal a smile. "Congratulations, Ashley, or should I say, Ms. Gallery Owner." I stood, feeling the weight of the moment. Through the office windows, I could see staff gathering in the main space, their faces curious and hopeful. Claire was distributing coffee cups, her movements quick and efficient. "Catherine," I said, "would you like to stay for the meeting? I think you'll find the gallery's new direction interesting." She nodded, and together we walked out to meet the staff. The morning light streamed through the skylights, illuminating the space in a way that felt new and full of possibility. I looked at the faces before me, the security team that had worked with David, the curators who'd always supported my vision, Claire with her sharp attention to detail, and felt a surge of determination. It was time to rebuild, this time on a foundation of truth. "Good morning," I began. "We have a lot to talk about." The staff meeting was unlike any we'd had before. Gone was the sterile corporate atmosphere Felix had cultivated, replaced by an energy of cautious hope. I stood in front of my team now, and told them the truth, not every detail, but enough. "The gallery is entering a new phase," I explained, watching their faces. "There will be changes, but I want to be clear about one thing. Your jobs are secure. In fact, I'll be reviewing salaries and benefits to ensure they reflect your true value to this institution." Claire, sitting,